I am thrilled to welcome Guido Henkel and Lucas Henkel, the folks behind Celluloid Dreams and the amazing new release of Short Night of Glass Dolls on 4K, which I happen to have right here. It's heavy. Oh, you've got one too. We're matching. Perfect. Um, I I'm happy to talk to you guys because I first became familiar with Celluloid Dreams with the Case of the Bloody Iris, which was the previous release. It was a really attractive package, a movie presented in a way that I hadn't seen before, and also a real commitment to extras that, as physical media is becoming more and more passe. Unfortunately, everything's gone streaming and digital. It's great to see a distributor take the time to really commit to making extra features for fans, especially for genre film fans. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. But first of all, how you guys doing?
Great. Good. Yeah.
All right.
Keeping busy. Yeah, keeping very busy.
Well, that's good. So I want to talk about this movie, specifically the way I first encountered Short Night of Glass Dolls. It was a couple years ago. We reviewed it on our Accademia Giallo series, in which we discuss every other month a Giallo film. Sometimes it's a blind spot, sometimes it's one that we're more familiar with. But in this case, I'd never seen Aldo Lado's movie before, and unfortunately, the only way I could watch it is a version on Tubi, which was very muddy and almost unwatchable. And then I found there was a ripped version on YouTube that was slightly better, but I found out that it was edited. So there was like all the good parts were cut out. So I went into that conversation loving the film, but also knowing that I hadn't actually watched it. And as is very rare on that show, I was kind of in the minority. It was a panel of four of us. I was raving about it, and the other three folks were kind of like, because, as I think we'll discuss, this is not, I don't think, what people think about when they think about Giallo. It is a very different kind of film. So what I want to talk to you about to lead off is, how did you decide to bring Glass Dolls to in the 4K deluxe treatment? And what was that process like? Because there are multiple different versions in this set. There's the 4K remaster. There's a Blu-ray version of that. There's also the fourth disc, which has the paralyzed version, which is the pan and scan from the VHS, and the 35 millimeter kind of grindhouse version. So, how did all of this come about, specifically regarding this film?
Firstly, the choice for Short Night of Glass Dolls kind of originated from the mindset of trying to look at movies that we consider being very highly valued and all that, but haven't been touched in quite a bit of time. And, Aldo Lado Short Night of Glass Doll came up. And when it came down to elements, when we actually got a hold of the licensing, we came across, the original camera negative. We got an archival lab print for it, which is on the fourth disc, as you mentioned. And the original camera negative was conformed to the original, I suppose you call it director's cut, or I suppose the Italian cut. And that is the primary version of the movie, the version that you would get on most normal releases. The lab print, I should probably specify also that the Techniscope negative was also untrimmed in a way because of the Techniscope format. It required 4 frames every cut or so, and that led to some minor nuances, and that's a difference that we had to account for between the lab print and the original camera negative. And then as time went on, we were trying to dig for as many different releases of the movie, to try and tally up to see how many different variations have cropped up over the years. The paralyzed version was one that came up as a rarity and an oddity at this point in time, because whilst they used to have originally been the only way to see the movie in the States, it's kind of non-existent nowadays because of the fact that, with the advent of anchor-based DVD releasing up, every release of the movie has been the original proper Techniscope or scope format. and that pan and scan edition is lost along with the original edit with the paralyzed title card. So that was a nice thing we were able to find through tracking down online to find an original tape.
I mean, one of the things is when we started the project, it wasn't really planned to be this big 4-disc release and all that. It all just sort of fell into place because initially the idea was, okay, we do 4 Short Night and we handle it the same way we did Bloody Iris, like 2 discs, a couple of bonus features, and then we go from there. But as we were working on it and digging up more and more material, it became clear that there is a wealth of material out there. You know, some of the featurettes and interviews were previously published by other companies overseas. So Camera Obscura, for example, you know, had an interview with the German director. And that is how slowly our pool of features grew. And eventually we were like, okay, 2 discs is not enough. We have to put all the bonus features on a separate disc. So it's going to be a 3-disc release. As time went on, and then we looked at the lab print that we had, we were both thinking, it's really a shame that people don't see that, you know, because all too often we forget what a 35mm print looked like. You know, there's a lot of nostalgia around them. There's a lot of romancing around them and all that. But a lot of people forget that they had issues, that they were not perfect, that they had defects, and more importantly, it also served as sort of a color reference. And then as we continued piling on more and more bonus features, we came across this ultra rare VHS copy of the film. And we realized, yeah, this is really the way people in the United States first encountered the movie, because it was never released theatrically. At the time, it had never been released on home video before. That pan and scan version was the first point of contact between Aldo Lado's movie and American audiences. And we said, this is almost historic in a sense, you know, and we have it sitting here on our desk. It would be such a shame if this gets lost. And then we said, okay, let's put it on the release as well, which turned the whole thing into a 4-disc release.
Mm. And we almost we tried originally to also include the German cut, because that was, you know, because that was an entirely different edit of the movie, and in a way some of the condensations that they did for it were kind of comedic, because it kind of removed half the exposition in the movie. So there's like scenes like the blind man talking, where like a whole chunk of that is missing.
Another like, 10 minutes?
It was like
out of the film.
Yeah, but it's like you have whole scenes of dialogue just completely missing, and it just kind of makes it as if when you get to the ending, you don't have any clue what happened. It just sort of happens, while the Italian and the English versions, they sort of like trickle it throughout.
That was really funny when we realized that, because the German version we watched, and it's like they're cutting out all the important stuff. You know, all the stuff that actually explains what's going on in the story, they took out for the German version. So at the end of the movie, like he says, you know, as a viewer, you were sitting there, it's like, okay, I guess it makes sense on some level, and you were really forced to make up your own interpretation and explanations as to what really happened and what the story is about. It was really bizarre, and we tried to get that on the disc as well, but unfortunately we couldn't clear the rights for that.
So that was a whole separate. This is something I wanted to ask about, because the way that you have talked about it, very kind of casually, I imagine there was a lot more sweat involved in putting this together. Because you said, you know, we happened upon this VHS tape. We got a copy of the film. Can you tell me about the journey to actually get the rights and discover these things? Did you have fans coming to you and saying, I've got this old version of it, you know, in my closet somewhere? Or did you have to go abroad to different countries, different studios to track down this stuff?
Yeah,
tracking.
It's mostly tracking. In the during the pre-production of something like that, it's almost like a detective story, you know. You start trying to find out who owns what has been out there, where could we possibly find it. So you scour the internet for sources and see, okay, what is on eBay? What is on eBay in Germany? What is on eBay in Italy and all that? Because there are different marketplaces, so stuff that you may not find here, you may find somewhere else. And in terms of the licensing, yeah, you contact the lab and you go with them through the material, all the assets they have, to find out what is available, what condition is it in, and then you have it scanned and you look at it and say, okay, this is usable, this is not usable. And yeah, it's really a very lengthy and tedious process, and it took us through the entire production of it. While we were restoring the film, all of a sudden something came up. It's like, oh, here's this. And we approached different labels that had released the film previously and asked them, for example, for permission, can we use and reuse the featurettes or some bonus feature that you had on there? And then you get into negotiations with them. And yeah, it's a lengthy process.
So when it's, as you mentioned, it's something that happens from the beginning to the end of the entire project. So when you're deciding, hey, we'd like to do Short Night of Glass Dolls, are there other films in consideration? And do you start off like exploring, okay, what can we find, manage, negotiate for these 3 films, and the one that's the least headache is the one we're going to pursue? Or do it sounds like a big almost risk to get kind of down a path and realize, oh, this is going to be much more involved than we had thought.
There's a lot of factors in that very specific regard because, I mean, I'm not going to specifically name movies, but we've had cases where we were about to license a movie, and then suddenly it told us the cost to scan it is what was like 3 times as much as the actual licensing of the movie. And then at that very moment, it's like, okay, no, forget it, we can't do that. There was an instance where we were desperately trying to find the rights to a few movies, and then when we actually did find it, the rights holder essentially told us that the movie at this point in time is in copyright hell, where no one can really agree on who owns the movie because half of these movies were co-productions. So you have these issues between Spain, Germany, and France and all that, where there's some who's like, we own this right, and the others are like, we own this. And some companies who are the main forefront for the movie, they just kind of don't want to have any part of that.
Yeah, it can get very messy, especially with these European movies, because many of them are co-productions. So Italy may have started it, and said, okay, we want to put this film into production, but we need more money. So they go to Germany, they go to Spain, and all over the place, to Yugoslavia, in Aldo Lado's case, and say, okay, we need money from somewhere. Now, all of a sudden, you have these different production companies involved, and each of them want to own a piece of the cake, of course. So in the end, when it gets to the distribution rights and all that, it can become very messy because one production partner has the rights to this territory, the other one has it to that territory, which fragments the whole thing very much. In many movies, this is not really a problem because it's very organized. In other movies, it's a complete nightmare because the guy in Spain thinks he has the rights to the movie in Italy, and the guy in Italy thinks he has worldwide rights and this, and nobody really knows who owns what. And that can become very dangerous especially for a small label like us, because that becomes a liability legally, So we have to be very careful that we talk to the right people who really can prove chain of custody wise, we are the proprietors of this film. We own the rights. And yeah, it goes from there.
I gotta ask, how did Celluloid Dreams come about? Because this, I think people, when they're going to buy a movie, they pick it up because they like the title or something. They don't necessarily think about who's putting it out.
Yeah.
But you launched a boutique label that is so far, taking Giallo very seriously. I'm just wondering, what was the inspiration? What's kind of your background, and how did you guys come to collaborate on getting into this venture?
So I would like to sort of describe you very briefly what my childhood was like, which was rows or shelves and shelves and shelves of DVDs and Blu-rays. So for most of my life, I have watched a lot of old movies. I have, like a lot of 80s, 70s movies and whatnot. And that is something that has always been sort of ingrained in me, and it's something I've always loved. And when I got into college, even though I didn't really study film as my primary degree, it was always something I kept tabs on, I always had an interest in. And as a result, I got into coloring and a couple other stuff. And afterwards, during the COVID period, I was, job hunting or so. And the train of thought occurred at one point, which is you have a number of these other boutique labels, such as Blue Underground and Synapse and whatnot, where at the core of those companies, they were very small operations. And I was dearly wondering, was like, how much money would it take to actually start up one of these companies? How much money is it to actually maintain one of these companies? So, after that, we went to a lot of calculations in terms of the whole finances regarding to how much would it take to license the movie, how much would it take to restore it,
Yeah.
and how much would it take to produce it and whatnot.
I mean, I have to add to that, because the way he describes how he grew up with these shelves and shelves of discs of movies and all that. I've been involved in home video for 25 years or more, actually more, almost close to 30 years. I used to run a website called dvdreview.com. And that was one of the very first websites that did reviews for DVD movies when DVD first launched. And at that point, the studios were very introverted. They had their PR departments and all that, their publicity departments, but they were not used to really interact with the internet. Internet was fairly new at the time to them. It was like, oh, no, it's piracy. We want nothing to do with that. So a couple of websites started during that period, and we really approached the studios very aggressively and said, this is the future. We can expose your product to, huge audiences and all that. So over the years, over those 20, 30 years that I've been running DVD Review, I've always been in touch very closely with all the Hollywood studios, small and large. And I got friendly with a lot of the folks on the production side of those. People like Bill Lustig, who runs Blue Underground, and Don May and all that. I've known them for a very, very long time, and I've been following closely what they do. In some instances, I even reported on what they were doing very closely. So every week I would get on the phone with them and sort of create a diary that I would publish on the website as they were preparing a special edition for Halloween at the time. And that taught me a lot about what it takes to put these releases together. So when Lucas approached me and said, how hard is it and what is necessary to do something like that, at least I had sort of a frame of reference already, but I had no idea about the costs involved. So I said, yeah, well, the easiest way to find out if this can be lucrative is to run the numbers. And yeah, at that point, we started reaching out to manufacturers, replication facilities, licensors, and so forth to find out what are the costs. We ran the numbers and ran best guess estimates as to how much we can sell and see how does it shake out. And then in the end, we're like, well, it's not entirely unrealistic. Let's give it a try.
I want to ask, what is your relationship? I know you are both Henkels, but I don't know how you two are related.
My son.
Awesome.
Okay. Because I was like, you don't look exactly like brothers, but but no, I mean, so you're talking about you're growing up, Lucas, with the shelves of VHS tapes. I imagine that's and DVDs and stuff later on. I imagine a lot of that's possibly due to dear old dad. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, because we had a gigantic, or we still have a gigantic movie collection.
Wow. So you run the numbers, you decide you can really make a go of it. Licensing is one thing, but in terms of what you do with these older films, tell me about the restoration, the kind of the upgrade process to 4K. What's involved in that? And is that something that you oversee, or do you outsource the whole thing, or how's that work?
In-house.
Yeah, we do it all ourselves.
Okay.
When it comes to film restoration, the main core that needs to be said is film as an element holds a lot of information. And as time goes on, our technology is getting better and better at being able to reinterpret that information digitally, which is why we have the advent of HD, then 4K and whatnot. And so we commissioned a 4K scan from the lab who held the archive who had the original camera negatives along with the lab print and whatnot. And we cleaned it all up in-house with our own, with Phoenix.
Yeah, software tools.
Yeah, software tools like Phoenix. And that entails to a lot of what I would describe as pixel peaking, because with the negative, you have lots of scratches, blemishes, dye defects, and that all has to be cleaned up both automatically and then spot checked by hand, as well as just in general, whereas like the stuff that software isn't able to catch, you have to manually then clean that up as well. And that takes a lot. I mean, a lot of time.
Yeah, it's a lengthy process because you have to go through the entire film frame by frame, look at it and say, okay, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed. So every frame you go through, and it takes weeks, months to do this kind of work. And then just when you think, okay, I've got it all, you run it and you're just like, oh Christ, there's so much that I completely missed, because it's the work itself is so narrowly focused. You stare at a certain part of the screen because for example, there's movement, and you have to pay very close attention to that. So then your vision sort of blocks out everything around it. So you're blinkered. But you're thinking, okay, I'm doing this, and you go through the film. And then as you sit back later and review the whole thing, you think, oh, there was all sorts of stuff going on the sides of the frame that I completely missed, and then you have to do a second pass and again. And it's a lengthy, tedious, and repetitive process. Very mind-numbing. But
So you
also
say
very rewarding.
Oh, I can imagine. I've seen some old beat up prints of things, and then you see the high definition, cleaned up version. It's a Herculean feat for sure. But I
And
guess,
then, if I may,
yeah.
And aside from the restoration, there's another really big step that goes into that, which is the color grading. And that is what Lucas does mostly, and that is to bring the colors back to where they are supposed to be.
So you're doing this in-house. Do you have a team, or is it literally just the two of you working on all of this?
It's the two of us.
So, okay, what did... All right. I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole here. So Guido, you've got your experience, running DVD review, and we'll talk about your commentaries in a few minutes. But what is both of your backgrounds in terms of doing this work? I mean, are you kind of classically trained in this? Is it something that you decided, well, if we want to do this, we have to bone up on it? Talk to me about your kind of education, your background, and your calling to this work.
Well, originally from my end, I'm a software engineer. I'm a computer games developer. I've had a long career in computer games since the 80s. So no, I have no formal training in film restoration at all. It is really, like you say, when the time came, we need to do this, or we want to do this, like, okay, I guess I have to learn some new software packages and see how that goes.
And as for me, when it came to colorist stuff, I've worked a little bit of it during the college days, but it was never a primary focus because I also was studying software engineering at the time, because the hope was the degree would be something stable or so. Film was not really the biggest forefront at that point in time, but on the side, I love to look at regrades. I like regrading some movies because, and this is a whole rabbit hole in itself regarding films, which is film prints have such a particular look in terms of the color tones and color depth. And that was something that I always was sort of fascinated and wanted to capture, which was the core of why I wanted to do colorist work, because I wanted to regrade some existing masters out there for some other releases for movies, to try and bring back the original look from references I could find online. So when it came time for Celluloid Dreams, when I actually had access to a real negative, not just some already graded master and all that, that in itself was a huge hurdle, because I am suddenly realizing where it's like, I need to figure out how to get this negative to where I want it to look from a printing perspective. And that in itself took a lot of time and a lot of experimentation to see what worked, what didn't work. and a lot of white paper reading, I would say, because the format.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, so he sort of ran away from his software engineering degree, and then while he's a colorist, now he realizes, oh, I need all that stuff because I need to actually write programs that do what I want to do in terms of the color conversion and all that.
Yeah, because like for the record, I do my work in DaVinci Resolve, and DaVinci Resolve has its own sort of programming language that lets you create your own color tools. And I've spent a lot of time trying to create my own tools to do really basic things because the program itself doesn't really do that. So yeah, ironically, yeah, I got a lot of use out of software engineering and colorist work somehow. But yeah, so it's a lot of I would say like academical kind of studying in its own right, even though I don't have a degree for it.
Wow. I mean, this is this is really this conversation is not going where I thought it was going to go. I mean, you're both down there sort of on the proverbial factory floor building the widgets, shipping them out and advertising them.
Right.
And it's quite amazing. I do want to talk about the comprehensive kind of package on Glass Dolls, because as you mentioned, some of the things, some of the features, the extra features you license, some of them are original, like your commentary, Guido. When you are putting these things together, do you have an idea of all of the things that you want to include and you go out looking for it? Or do you put a few things together and say, okay, how does this work with our overall vision for the package? You mentioned that, when you found the kind of the paralyzed cut, like, okay, now we need to add an extra disc. There's sort of that feature creep that gets into the project. But as far as the overall vision, is that something that's also evolving, or are you able to map that out and say, okay, we need a couple of commentaries, we want to have this behind the scenes, we want to have a writer for the booklet, the essay.
Yeah.
How does that all work out?
We usually work that out in the beginning. It starts with a look at what is available, what's out there, and can we get access to it. But then we always feel we want to round out a release with new features as well. And if you take Short Night, for example, we definitely wanted something that focuses on the Kafkaesque aspect of the film, because none of the existing bonus features had done that before. They were interviews with cast and producers and all that, but that and Aldo Lado. But even Aldo never really talked about the Kafka influences, this sort of weirdness of the world that he's portraying and all that, at least not in a whole lot of detail. So we thought we really need to highlight that, because I think that is what makes the film so effective on a creep level. So we knew we want a featurette that sort of focuses on that. And that's why we hired Howard Berger to do that for us, because we felt he is the perfect guy, to dive really deep into that aspect of it. And the same with the essay that we have in the booklet. That was very deliberate. We wanted that. We wanted an overview of Aldo Lado's career, because again, in this whole package that we had with the existing featurettes and all that, that got lost a little bit. He covered a lot of it in his interviews and in his own commentary, but we just wanted to compact it all together and say, okay, this is the arc that he went through and all that, especially because we felt very strongly to make this a tribute to him, because unfortunately he passed away while we were working on it. And it was one of these things where we really felt it's like, now even more than before, we need to make sure we create this complete package, really, that we can say this is the version that everybody should have, because it contains everything you could ask for or that you could hope for to get.
Well, I think from what I've seen of the extras, and I have not gone through all of them because there are, as you mentioned, there's multiple versions of the film and tons of things. But I will say I was particularly struck by the booklet length essay, or just about the essay by was it Andy Marshall Roberts.
Yeah.
Talking about Lado's career, and I think that was a good companion piece to not only the commentary but also the as you mentioned, the Kafka-esque retrospective, putting it all in context and looking at him as a sort of a political filmmaker in the ways that we like to think of, movies from the 60s and the 70s that were really, the subtext or even the big text is really trying to say something while also thrilling audiences. It's a fascinating read. I honestly, when I see booklets, sometimes I'll just like kind of skip right past them. Like, I know this is going to be, but I really was not ready for that. And then the icing on the cake was you included two original newspaper reviews of the film that kind of panned it, and they were both very much hung up on the black mass. I mean, half of these things were, this is about a black mass, I don't know what's going on, and by the way, the movie kind of stinks. It's like
Yeah, and I think that is the general story of the film. How should I say, the fate of the film, the bane of the film, that it is oftentimes so misunderstood. A lot of people, I think, watch the movie once, walk away from it, say, yeah, meh, it was okay. The problem with Short Night is, first of all, it's a film you have to watch more than once to fully understand what is happening and to really get into the subtext of it, to understand, he didn't mean this literally, or he just set up a party scene here. There is so much going on different layers, on different levels, starting with the cast itself, the faces he cast, they were all very deliberate. It's no accident that the people look the way they look. It's no accident that they have candle lights and all that in 1970, where everybody has electrical light, that sort of thing. And again, like I say, a lot of people sort of misunderstand the movie and do not take the time to fully appreciate it. Once you do that, and once you dig a little deeper, suddenly it opens this whole wealth of subtext and connotations, and you realize this is so much more, and this is so much more powerful because of it, that in the end, the final shot of the movie suddenly becomes almost heart-wrenching, and your first viewing is like, oh yeah, that happened, but then the second or third viewing, you go like, oh my God, is this real, and the consequences of it, what it means to the world, essentially, what's happening.
And I would also just like to add real fast, where it's like, and part of the issue I would say with the movies, the viewpoint of the movie in a way is because it is considered, or it's bulked into the Giallo genre as a whole, it becomes a detriment in its own right, because whilst on one hand you can see it as a really weird outlier in the genre, that as a result kind of becomes what people remember for most viewings or so. If you're not a huge fan of the movie, yeah, you'll watch it and then you just think it's like, oh yeah, it was a weird kind of thing. So it's definitely a matter of how you interpret the movie and how you want to go at it, in terms of when you go into watching it, it works like miles better if you try thinking of it more as like a conspiracy thriller kind of deal than anything the Giallo genre typically brings. And that in itself is kind of a blessing and a curse in its own right, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, Lado was such a deliberate architect of that movie, and all his movies, I would say. But yeah, it's all so carefully crafted, It's remarkable. And if you go in as a casual viewer and say, oh, hey, I'm expecting a black glove killer slasher movie and all that, it's like, yeah, that's not it, and you will walk away disappointed. But like I said, if you take the time to dig into it a little more and think about what is happening, what's going on the screen, it is so much more rewarding.
Yeah, when I watched it a couple summers ago, again for the first time, I had just seen the Barbenheimer duo, Barbie and then Oppenheimer, and I described Short Night of Glass Dolls as if Christopher Nolan had made Eyes Wide Shut. It does have those kind of like sinister class,
Yeah.
moving the levers of power vibes, but to your point, it is so deliberate, and everything there are layers of meaning in every moment, almost every image and every detail. Some of which, in terms of Glass Dolls, I picked up listening to your audio commentary. Which I have to ask you, how many times did you watch the film in order to prepare for this commentary? Do you have like thick notebooks of notes or what? Because you approached this movie just in the first, by the time we get to the opening kind of party scene, where our two, well, our main character and his ill-fated girlfriend are walking into this high society, to do. My head is already spinning from all the information I've gotten up to this point. But when you start talking about how the themes of the movie are all right there in these various details that I had not even noticed the first time I watched it, I knew that the rest of the journey was going to be quite a lesson. So,
Yeah.
how did you approach this, and what was your process like in drafting this audio commentary?
I think one of the advantages that I have in this situation is because I'm restoring the film, I'm spending a lot of time with the film. And because I go through it frame by frame, I'm noticing small things that would otherwise potentially escape your attention if you're just watching it, because they just happen so fast. So in those cases, I typically take notes, but it also often creates situations where after you finish a shot and you think about it and you look at it and the question arises, why did they do that? Because sometimes it makes no sense, or it's something that feels very deliberate, and you start thinking about it in the back of your head as you continue working on it. And eventually it bubbles to the surface and I take a note and say, okay, I need to research this more. And the same is true with locations. While I'm working on it and I see an outdoor location, for example, I'm like, okay, I need to find out where that is. So I take visual references of landmarks, hop over on Google Maps and said, let's find this place. And that is, for example, how I found that Aldo Lado was misidentifying the opening scene, the park in the opening scene, when he said was shot in Zagreb. No, this was shot in Prague, when the park is actually in Zagreb. And that was with Google Maps, I was able to find that out. So these little things. So once I'm finished with the restoration, I have these long, long notes, like pages and pages of notes. And I gather them and start fleshing them out, say, okay, what can I talk about this? What can I say about that? And what needs more research? So I'm digging into these things, flesh out the different ideas and content. And also, there is a particular aspect for me that I find interesting because I grew up in Germany. So these European productions oftentimes have very different meaning to me than for an American audience. So take Mario Adolf, for example. He's an actor that I was very, very familiar with. Whereas American audiences and Lucas, for example, meant nothing to him. And I was like, I have to tell people about this because he is such an incredible actor, such an incredibly accomplished actor, and such a great person. And that leads to these little vignettes that I created in the commentary where I highlight certain players and say, this is this actor and he's famous for this. Same with Jürgen Drews, for example, the singer. He has like 10 seconds in the movie and hardly anybody would ever cover him for anything. But I felt it very important because this was the beginning of his career and he turned into a superstar in Germany as a singer, So I just felt that is important for people to know that these are not just totally unknown people and total anonymous characters. These are people who have some weight had some weight when these films were made. So, and that all together meshes together, and then you try to make a coherent commentary out of it.
So, do you you write everything down, you've got it all kind of mapped out, and then you record it. Are you going back to the commentary and then doing heavy edits on that, or rethinking or reworking, or like, what is that process like?
Lengthy, frustrating. Yeah, very, very tedious. So just to give you an idea, the commentary for Bloody Iris, for example, I recorded 6 times before I was happy with it. Short Night, I think I recorded 4 times. And it involves a lot of editing. Also because of the timing. Sometimes you want to say something and the film runs away from you, because I'm talking about one thing and there's something I want to talk about, but I can't because I'm in the middle of something. So editing becomes a very tricky thing sometimes. And then if there's no other alternative, sometimes I go back and say, okay, I have to loop back to this shot because, it was important and I want to talk about that. But yeah, so I try to place these different sections that I have then so that they at least somewhat match what's going on the screen timing wise. It's like I said, it's a very, very elaborate process. Yeah.
I appreciate that effort because it reminds me of I don't know if you guys know the movie Say Anything, the John Cusack, Cameron Crowe movie. All right. When that DVD came out 20 years ago at a special edition, they advertised a commentary by Cameron Crowe. They had stills of the movie once you pressed play. He talked for 45 minutes before the movie began,
Yeah.
before he started his commentary. And I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I told Lucas at one point, I wish we had a feature where we could just freeze frame the movie during the commentary and say, here, hold this. I want to talk about this particular frame, for example. But yeah, can't do that. Film keeps going.
Well, I mean, if you had a fifth disc, you might be able to, a film school edition or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah,
I
know.
I remember, for example, New Line used to have this Infinifilm feature
Yes.
back in the day. Something in me oftentimes screams and said, we should do that, we should do that. But boy, the effort would just be so enormous. It's bad. But Infinifilm was really cool. I don't know if you remember that. But yeah, it was really like an insert in the movie where you could literally stop the movie and say, okay, here's a little picture-in-picture window, and we want to show you this because it goes with the scene and all that. It's like something like that would be cool.
I just want to say something. I have a hard time after listening to the two of you tell your story about Celluloid Dreams and Glass Dolls in particular. I have a hard time thinking about all the effort that went into it, and then there's a new challenge, and you saying, "I can't imagine the amount of work going into it." Come on, there's nothing you can't do.
Yeah.
I do want to ask. We kind of talked about this a bit before, as far as this is not a conventional giallo. And I think that's why when I had that initial discussion with it a couple of years ago with my panelists, there was some disagreement between myself and them because this is so not in the genre typically. What is giallo? I'm going to ask the dangerous question. What is giallo, and how does this movie get categorized in that genre, even though it's very loosely associated?
Well, I mean, yeah, the problem with the giallo genre is, depending on who you talk to, it could have a very different connotation. And for me personally, it, on the broadest level, refers to what I would describe as crime thrillers or crime thriller movies, because that seems to encompass most of the movies. There's still a couple outliers, I would say, especially if you look at something like Perfume of the Lady in Black, which is one I particularly enjoy, but it's not exactly a crime thriller in a way, because it's much more of a weird Polanski-esque kind of fare. But if you condense a lot of like the Argento movies and whatnot, whereas like at their core, it usually involves, like a murder scheme. And you have the protagonist running around trying to figure out what is going on, why are these people being murdered. And I feel that whether or not how sexual it is, how violent it is, how stylish it is, that's just more of generally the flavor of whoever is making it than necessarily the genre. Because it always kind of, it nags at me sometimes when I see some people associating the genre with only the really stylish lighting or camera work and all that. It was like, no, there's a lot of movies out there where they're very bare bone, they're very rugged. I mean, if you ever own any of the Forgotten Giallo sets from Vinegar Syndrome, you'll see just how rugged that can get. And it's one of those things where it's like, sure, it's a nice association with Italian filmmaking, but no, the genre at its core, to me, seems to be mostly, murder, mystery, thriller, fair.
I mean, I think I am pretty pragmatic about it, I think. Gialli come from the paperbacks, from the book industry, right? So let's take a look at what was published as a giallo in paper. Agatha Christie was one, Hitchcock was, Gardner was, all these traditional murder mysteries were historically gialli in print. So if we translate that into film, I would also say, if it's a murder mystery and it comes out of Italy, I would say it's a giallo. because that's what the term itself encapsulates.
I mean, another thing also I do want to add real fast is also, depending on what period you look at, the Giallo genre entails to a very different kind of movie. Because if you look at it in the 60s, they were very much reliant on what I would describe as blackmail slash gaslight schemes. The kind of thing where a lot of them are somebody gets killed off and suddenly the body disappears and they say, you're crazy, that person never died. And, you know, a lot of those movies, a lot of the Umberto Lenzi movies kind of fell in that category. And then as you get into the 70s with Dario Argento, they started entering what I could humorously coin as a or a rebirth or a neo version of it, where it became much more visceral and became more reliant on the violence and the graphic content of it. And that's much more with what you would get with like a Martino movie, where even though they also had very heavy script writing and all because of Ernesto Gastaldi and whatnot, they definitely became a lot more reliant on excess to sell.
I mean, they evolved, right? And they became more sensational because that's what sold. But when they started, you know, they were really at their core murder mysteries. And it's just from there that they evolved and then became what we now look at as these really flashy and stylized films.
It's especially funny because then you look at some directors, like if you look at Lucio Fulci, and you look at one of his early Giallo movies, so like Don't Torture a Duckling or Perversion Story, they were much more, I would like to say, reliant more on the narrative than it was on necessarily violence. They did have their violent moments, especially in Don't Torture a Duckling, but it wasn't really the main focus that you would associate with his name. Then you fast forward to the 80s with New York Ripper, which is the complete polar opposite, which is, you know, completely sensational. Everyone remembers the razor scenes in the eye and all stuff. And it's just, you know, it's a reflection of the times more than anything else, I would say.
But that's the style. That's not the genre. And I think that's important to realize, you know, there's the genre and there's the style. And just because it is not following a certain style, which means the super gory or excessive sensationalism, doesn't mean it's no longer a Giallo. At least to me, it is.
Right, and looking at Glass Dolls, I mean, it is very stylized in its own way. Even just looking at the premise, the screenplay, you know, you've got an American journalist in Prague, and the movie opens with his body being found and being carted off to the morgue until you realize, wait a second, he's not dead. Everyone believes that he is because he's on such a low register that they can't even find a heartbeat. The giveaway is that they stick him in the morgue freezer and they pull him out the next day, and his body temperature hasn't changed. But meanwhile, he's narrating to us, you know, kind of Sunset Boulevard, looking back at his life and the events that led up to his fate. And you know, it's a bonkers kind of movie and very chilling at the very end. For those folks who haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but it has one of those endings where you think everything is going to end up okay for our dashing hero, played by Jean Sorel, but it doesn't necessarily work out. And it doesn't necessarily work out in such a spectacular fashion that it has, I think, one of the most memorable endings and great freeze frame endings of all time. So yeah, guys, I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to go over today, except in addition to the 4 discs and this great, like, sturdy, like, you know, you can stop a bullet with this case here. There's also some cool extras, like there's a full set of like lobby cards, which I can see in the background back there.
Yeah.
And then also a film strip that comes with the set. So,
Sorry, I have to ask, what strip did you get? I'm curious.
I have not, my eyesight is terrible, so I haven't actually had a chance to like look at this. I'm trying to see it now. I need to get like a magnifying glass or something, but I got a film strip. I'll have to see what it is. But I want to ask about that, like the decision to include like the lobby cards and the film strip. It like how did that come about, and what's the process of making those? I mean, that sounds like an entirely different set of tools that you need to engage in to release a movie on home video?
So the lobby cards kind of came down to I would kind of loosely say we looked at the competition and saw that a lot of different releases for these Italian titles, they included these photo busters and whatnot, but in a very miniaturized form. And originally I did want to do that because I thought, in general, it was cool to provide. But also me being as a part of this modern generation, I did not comprehend the idea of how big those things are. And that was something that Guido had to point out to me, which is, and this is something I have to say for the record, where it's like, these, as big as these are in the grand scheme of, the home video releases, these are tiny in comparison to the actual
To the
things.
originals, yeah. Because the original lobby cards are poster sized. That's what many people don't know. And yeah, in home video, we have gotten so accustomed to the fact that there are these little postcards. And I always looked at them as like, this is a joke. I mean, you can't even see what's on there, and all that. It's like, I understand they have to fit in the case, but still, it's like, this is, So when we said we want something extra, it's like, okay, let's do lobby cards, but let's make them bigger so that people can at least see what they display. And yeah, I remember Lucas was really reluctant at first. It's like, I don't know if people really like that. I don't know what are they going to do with them and all that. And we persisted and said, let's give it a try, see how people react. And if people don't like them, then we stop doing it. But it became evident very quickly that people took to them and they're like, this is so cool, because I can hang them on the wall or I can really look at them. I can study them. It is sort of the same effect that you have with a CD and a vinyl album cover. When I grew up, we would sit there and we would stare and look at these vinyl covers, and really, really look intensively at every little detail and all that. And on CD, you can't do that. It's just a tiny little print. And the same thing happened with the lobby cards, I think. Yeah, you have a lobby card and yeah, this is what it looks like, but you're missing out on all the details. That's where the big one comes in and was like, let's do that. Let's give it a try. And the same with the film strip. I mean, the film strip was an interesting idea that we thought we'd give a shot.
I will say real fast that it also kind of originated briefly by, I would say by happen chance, because when I was trying to do research into the actual lab who was doing the scanning for us, because I wanted to, figure out some specifications related stuff, hardware and whatnot. It came to my attention that one of the services they listed was we can create 35mm prints for stuff. And it led down this train of thought, which is, how much would it even cost to strike a print of anything? And I mean, obviously, we weren't going to strike the whole movie. I mean, there's a part of me that desperately wishes I could strike the whole movie, but, we don't have the money for that. And frankly, trying to get that from over in Italy to here would just be insane in terms of costs. But we did negotiate though with the lab about the costs of striking the original trailer. And it was something that I thought was rather wonderful because, it goes back to the earlier conversation, which is it's very easy to forget the kind of characteristics a film print has. Because when you have a negative or when you have a lot of the home video restorations of a movie, the negative gives you a very broad look of the movie because it shows you pretty much every little corner that you could see of the negative. But with the print, it sort of changes the look. Anyways, and I wanted to bring a little part of that to customers and for people who are fans of this movie to get a little glimpse into what it could look like through that. Granted, it's not timed, but at the same time, it's still a very interesting insight into how certain shots in the movie may have looked when originally struck.
I think there is a very important aspect as well to that film print, which is you suddenly realize originally when they made these films, this was a tiny little frame that is projected and we're watching it on a screen that fills an entire house. And the level of detail you have on that tiny little frame is enough to sustain that. I think that in itself is staggering, you know, and we forget that in the digital domain. We have the TVs, we have them huge and everything, and we just fill them with pixels and all that. We don't even think about where does that come from. So that transition from the film image, which is this tiny, to that gigantic picture that people see in their living room screen and all that, that's a transformation. That's an adventure, you know. And I think having the film print in people's hands is the best reminder of that, to really tell them this is where it started and this is where it ended.
That's something that I have never really thought about until you mentioned it just now, because I'm looking at this. Mostly when we engage with film strips nowadays, it's looking for, clip art or something on the internet, and you see this nice big kind of cartoon image of something. But when you're looking at an actual film strip, I mean, this thing, we're talking about the lobby cards are bigger than usual in terms of home video cards. This almost looks like a miniature film strip. It's so small, but you realize this is the real deal. That's fascinating. Cool. Well, I don't know if you can say, but I assume you're working on the next production for Celluloid Dreams. Anything you want to like mention or promote, or is it still kind of under wraps?
No, we announced it before. There's an inlay in the box as well. So right now we're working on the black belly of the tarantula.
Right. Okay. So that's the next one. So you're working on that, or is that ready to come out? Or I missed, like, do you have a release date?
No, that's still very much in the oven. Still plenty of cleanup work to be done, plenty of color work to be done. But I will say there have been already a number of exciting developments regarding that whole restoration. I won't describe exactly what has been going on, because that'll be for the future. But it's certainly already been proving to be quite a venture on its own.
Yeah, it's a journey too. Kind of like Short Night, where things happen and evolve, and you go like, oh, we can do this and we can do that suddenly, and it's like, yeah, this is cool.
Excellent. And the thing I love most about your story, for the both of you, is that you are continuing to learn and evolve. And I assume that your passion for the films and the work that it took to make them is evolving as well. So thank you very much for hanging out and sharing your story. We didn't really talk about what A Short Night of Glass Dolls is, but folks can go back and watch the Accademia Giallo episode if they wanted to learn that, or they can buy the film.
That is something people can easily remedy. They can just buy the film and take a look for themselves. They don't need us to tell them what it is.
Yes.
But if you're shill, come to our website, buy it. You get the strip, you get the card.
Oh yeah, I mean the full links to everything will be down below. And what my panelists said a couple of years ago aside, I think that you can go into this as a blind buy, especially with this lovely package that y'all have put together. Watch the movie. If you have seen it before, I guarantee you've never seen it like this. And if you haven't seen it before, I think it's going to be kind of mind-blowing. And then when you watch the extras and experience everything surrounding the movie thematically and in terms of the production, it's really going to blow some minds. So again, Guido and Lucas, thank you so much for talking to me. Folks out there, if you like this show, please like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Be sure and pick up The Short Night of Glass Dolls and The Case of the Bloody Iris, and just generally support Celluloid Dreams. So thank you all very much. Until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks and take care.